What happens when Hollywood royalty meets Britain's most uncompromising journalist? In just 19 seconds, a carefully orchestrated media appearance transforms into television chaos, leaving one of the world's most famous women storming off set in fury. Last night's explosive encounter between Meghan Markle and Piers Morgan has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. And tonight, we're bringing you the exclusive inside story of how it all went so spectacularly wrong. The stage was set for what should have been a routine promotional interview. Meghan had arrived at the London studios to discuss her latest charitable endeavors, her perfectly styled hair catching the studio lights as she settled into the guest chair across from Piers. The veteran broadcaster, known for his direct questioning style and unwavering pursuit of truth, had prepared what he believed would be a straightforward conversation about her ongoing philanthropic work. But from the moment the cameras began rolling, tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Piers, ever the professional, opened with his trademark warmth, welcoming Meghan to the show with genuine enthusiasm. His voice carried that familiar, authoritative tone that had made him one of Britain's most respected television personalities. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here tonight," Piers began, his hands clasped professionally on the desk before him. "I understand you've been working on some incredible projects lately. Tell us about your recent charity work in Africa." Meghan's response came with a slight edge that keen observers might have detected. Her smile seemed forced, her posture rigid as she shifted in her chair. "Well, Piers, I think it's important to focus on the real issues that matter to people, not just the surface-level stories that sell newspapers." The comment hung in the air for a moment. Piers, to his credit, maintained his composure, his years of experience evident in how he handled the subtle provocation. He leaned forward slightly, his expression remaining neutral but attentive. "Of course, substance over sensation, I couldn't agree more," he replied smoothly. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk about your foundation work. But I have to ask, given your unique position in both American and British society, do you feel there's a responsibility to address some of the more controversial statements you've made in recent interviews?" Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. Her hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, now gripped the arms of her chair. "I'm not sure what you mean by controversial, Piers. Speaking truth about personal experiences isn't controversial. It's necessary." "I respect that," Piers continued, his tone remaining measured and professional. "But when those personal experiences involve allegations about institutions that millions of people hold dear, surely you understand why there might be questions about the accuracy of those claims?" The atmosphere in the studio grew increasingly tense. Crew members exchanged glances behind the cameras. Sensing the shift in dynamic, Meghan's media training seemed to be failing her as her carefully constructed public persona began to crack under Piers' persistent but fair questioning. "Are you calling me a liar?" Meghan's voice rose slightly, the first clear sign that the interview was heading into dangerous territory. Piers raised his hands in a calming gesture, his experience as a journalist evident in how he attempted to de-escalate while still pursuing his line of inquiry. "Not at all. I'm simply asking for clarification. When you make claims about conversations that allegedly took place in private, without witnesses, it's natural for people to want to understand the full context." "The full context is that I lived it," Meghan shot back, her composure slipping further. "I don't need to provide evidence for my own lived experience." "Of course not," Piers agreed, his voice remaining steady. "But when that lived experience becomes public narrative that affects other people's reputations, particularly people who cannot defend themselves publicly due to protocol, surely there's a responsibility to ensure accuracy?" Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. She leaned forward in her chair, pointing a finger directly at Piers. "This is exactly the problem. This is exactly why people like me can't speak our truth without being questioned, doubted, and torn apart by people like you." The accusation hung heavy in the studio air. Piers, rather than becoming defensive, maintained his professional demeanor, a testament to his decades of handling difficult interviews. His response came measured and calm. "Meghan, with respect, questioning claims isn't the same as questioning someone's worth or right to speak. It's what journalists do. It's what keeps public discourse honest. When anyone, regardless of their status, makes serious allegations, those allegations deserve scrutiny. That's not personal, that's professional." "Professional?" Meghan's voice cracked with emotion and rising anger. "There's nothing professional about ambushing someone with gotcha questions designed to make them look bad. This isn't journalism, this is a hit job." The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of cameras and equipment. Piers took a moment before responding, his expression showing genuine concern rather than triumph at having gotten under his guest's skin. "I can assure you, this isn't an ambush. he said quietly. These are legitimate questions that many people want answered. My job is to ask difficult questions, not to provide easy platforms for unchallenged statements. Your job, Meghan said, her voice now dripping with disdain, is to tear down successful women who dare to speak out against systems that have protected men like you for decades. The personal attack marked a clear turning point in the interview. Piers' eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his composure with remarkable professionalism. I think you're mistaking accountability for attack, he replied calmly. I've interviewed thousands of people from all walks of life, men and women, powerful and powerless. My questions are based on facts and public statements, not gender or personal animosity. Facts? Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp. Your facts are whatever supports your predetermined narrative. You decided before I walked in here that you were going to make me the villain. That's simply not true, Piers responded, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment. I came into this interview hoping for honest dialogue about important issues. I've given you every opportunity to explain your perspective. Meghan's face flushed red as she gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. The controlled facade she had maintained throughout her public life was crumbling in real time, and viewers could see every crack forming in her composure. Honest dialogue? She spat, her voice rising to a level that made the sound engineers scramble to adjust their equipment. You call this honest? You're sitting there with your smug little smirk, acting like some kind of moral authority, when everyone knows you're just another tabloid hack dressed up in an expensive suit. Piers remained remarkably calm, his years of experience showing as he absorbed the personal insult without flinching. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression more concerned than offended. Meghan, I understand you're upset, but personal attacks don't change the validity of the questions being asked. I'm not your enemy here. I'm simply doing what any responsible journalist would do when presented with serious claims that affect multiple parties. Responsible? Meghan's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. You want to talk about responsibility? How about the responsibility to treat your guests with basic human decency instead of treating them like criminals on trial? The camera operators adjusted their angles, sensing they were capturing something unprecedented. Never before had viewers seen Meghan lose control so completely, her carefully crafted public image dissolving before their eyes. I've treated you with nothing but respect, Piers replied, his tone growing slightly firmer but still professional. I've asked fair questions about public statements you've made. If that feels like persecution to you, perhaps the issue isn't with the questions, but with the answers you're struggling to provide. Struggling? Meghan shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward from the force. The only thing I'm struggling with is sitting here listening to this character assassination disguised as journalism. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in ratings and destroying anyone who threatens your precious establishment. Piers remained seated, his hands folded calmly on the desk as he looked up at his now standing guest. His voice carried a note of genuine sadness rather than triumph. Meghan, please sit down. Let's have a civilized conversation. Nobody is trying to destroy you. But when you make public accusations that affect real people, those accusations deserve examination. That's how democracy works. That's how accountability works. Democracy? Meghan's laugh was harsh and bitter. Don't lecture me about democracy while you're using your platform to silence women who dare to speak truth to power. You're part of the problem, Piers. You're exactly the kind of person who keeps systems of oppression running by attacking anyone brave enough to expose them. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Piers' expression shifted slightly, showing the first sign of genuine frustration with his guest's increasingly irrational behavior. That's a serious accusation, Meghan, and it's completely unfounded. I've spent my career giving platforms to people from all backgrounds to tell their stories. But having a platform doesn't mean being exempt from questions. It means being prepared to defend your statements when challenged. Defend? Meghan's voice reached a pitch that made several crew members wince. Why should I have to defend my own lived experience to someone who wasn't there, who doesn't know me, who's already made up his mind about who I am and what I represent? Because that's what adults do when they make public claims, Piers replied, his patience clearly being tested but his professionalism still intact. They expect questions. They prepare answers. They engage in dialogue rather than throwing tantrums when challenged. The word tantrum hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her eyes widened with fury, and for a moment she stood completely still, trembling with rage. Tantrum? She whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. Then, exploding back to full volume. Tantrum? How dare you? How absolutely dare you dismiss my legitimate concerns as a tantrum? This is exactly the kind of sexist, condescending garbage that women have to deal with every single day. It's not sexist to point out unreasonable behavior, Piers said, his voice growing slightly sharper. I would say the same thing to anyone, male or female, who responded to fair questions with personal attacks and emotional outbursts instead of reasoned responses. Meghan began pacing behind her chair, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke. Fair questions? Fair? There's nothing fair about ambushing someone with hostile interrogation disguised as an interview. You brought me here under false pretenses to make me look bad, and when I defend myself, you call me unreasonable. I brought you here to discuss your charitable work and to address some of the claims you've made publicly, Piers replied firmly. You chose to turn this into a confrontation rather than a conversation. You chose to attack me personally rather than answer straightforward questions about your own statements. My own statements? Meghan spun around to face him directly, her eyes blazing. My statements about racism, about mental health struggles, about being abandoned by institutions that were supposed to protect me? Those statements? Yes, those statements, Piers said quietly. Because they're serious allegations that deserve serious discussion, not emotional manipulation designed to shut down legitimate inquiry. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Meghan's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to form a response, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling under the weight of Piers' measured persistence. Emotional manipulation? She finally managed, her voice barely controlled. You think my pain is manipulation? You think sharing my truth is some kind of calculated performance for your entertainment? I think, Piers said, leaning forward slightly, that when someone makes serious public accusations without evidence, and then claims that asking for evidence is persecution, reasonable people have a right to be skeptical. The word skeptical proved to be the final straw. Meghan's composure shattered completely, her voice rising to a shriek that echoed through the studio. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I don't have to subject myself to this abuse disguised as journalism. You people are all the same. Tear down anyone who threatens your comfortable little narratives. She stormed toward her chair, grabbing her purse with such force that several items spilled onto the floor. This interview is over. I'm done being your victim for entertainment. Piers remained seated, his expression sad rather than victorious, as he watched one of the world's most famous women completely lose control on live television. Meghan, please? He called out as she headed toward the studio exit. We can continue this conversation like adults. There's no need for this kind of behavior. But Meghan was already at the studio door, her hand on the handle as she turned back one final time, her face flushed with rage and humiliation. Adults? She screamed across the studio. Adults don't ambush people and then act surprised when they fight back. You want a story, Piers? Here's your story. You're everything that's wrong with media. Everything that's wrong with this industry, and I refuse to be your victim. With that final declaration, she yanked open the studio door and disappeared into the corridor beyond, leaving behind a stunned silence, broken only by the quiet hum of cameras that had captured every moment of her spectacular meltdown. Piers sat alone at his desk, shaking his head slowly as the full magnitude of what had just transpired settled over the studio like a heavy blanket.